when big battle tanks get stuck, you need something rather large to pull them out. So these guys would float around, be called out to anything that got stuck or broken down to tow them out of the way. Because when you've got a 60-ton main battle tank, it takes a lot to tow them. And you'll see on the back of it the big spades to dig in. So these spades would lower down when they're winching. So it would pull into the ground and stop the recovery vehicle from actually moving, so they could winch the casualty vehicle out. And it's about 1 mile to the gallon. So this will empty your wallet extremely quickly, not to mention getting them around as well. So these are used with support. Right, got some incoming fire going on the Bren gun. So like I said, these will support all the armoured regiments, but not so much that, they will be used pulling out smaller vehicles as well. Because if you've got a big winch, you can pull anything out you like, which is quite nice. So once I find out what's going and what's behind it, I think something's fallen off the bay. Been dropping some kit. Anyway, so coming around the front of the arena is a Saracen. Now those who are in this morning saw the Saladin with the 75mm gun. So it's the same base, or same drive system and wheel system, but this is an armoured personnel carrier. So basically for patrols, going out to checkpoints and all that sort of stuff. And they were very popular with the film industry as well, because they thought they looked really nice, really futuristic, but they are a pain to maintain. They really, really are.
Very high power anti-tank gun. The vehicle pulling it is the Morris Portee, which was designed originally to have a 2-pounder anti-tank gun, of which we'll see more in a little while, on its back, and was designed to tootle around the desert, shooting at German tanks and irritating them. Being obsolete during the Second World War, the British then introduced the 6-pounder anti-tank gun. As that became obsolete, as the Germans added more armour to their tanks, the 17-pounder, but you'll see how well balanced the gun is, and the 4 guys have deployed that. They're going to spread the legs now. Again, larger crew member onto the end of the barrel to balance it. And the gun is ready for action. So, the 17-pounder was used from 1942 when it first went into action in the desert, and initially more barrels had been produced than carriages. So as a bit of a stopgap, the guns and the recoil mechanism, which is the square section which is underneath the barrel, were mounted on 25-pounder gun carriages, and there was plenty of 25-pounder carriages available, and they were whisked off to the desert where they were needed to shoot at German Tiger tanks. The gun itself, which fires its rounds out at about just a smidge under 2,000 miles per hour, could penetrate the armour on basically all of the German tanks at certainly 500 metres, and in most cases up to 1,000 or 1,500 metres. They were quite regularly fought against armour at up to 2,000 metres, and so this made it a very potent gun, and certainly the most powerful of the British anti-tank guns during the Second World War. It also went on to serve with a lot of other armies, and with the British Army through into the Korean War, and after that basically all over the world. It was made redundant by the Carl Gustaf shoulder-mounted anti-tank missile system, and which of course could be carried by one man instead of the normal 6-man crew and a portee and a 3.5-ton gun. The basic armour-piercing rounds, which were what are called kinetic rounds, And by that we mean that the sheer energy of the round hitting the tank was what was used to penetrate the armour. In a little while, literally 30 seconds odd, we're going to fire this gun, and 15 seconds, so any of you that want to cover your ears, please get ready to do it now. Now, that's actually a very tame bang compared to the bang that you would have got had it been a live round that had been fired. In this instance, the gun doesn't recoil at all. If you were firing a live round, you would have had a recoil of up to 60 inches, so the whole of that barrel mechanism and the breech block at the back would have swung right the way back by 60 inches. And very often, the wheels would also jump up off the ground. And the discarding sabot works in much the same way as a normal round, except it's a thinner round based on a tungsten core projectile. Around that tungsten core projectile are 3 packing pieces, and as they come out of the barrel at very high speed, the wind literally blows the packing pieces away, and the energy of the round is then all concentrated in that heavy tungsten dart, effectively, which travels very much faster and is able to penetrate the German armour much more deeply. The only downside to the discarding sabot ammunition was the fact that it was less accurate. And so a first round hit, which normally at 1,000 yards was 98%, to see how much dust the guns kick up. And particularly when they were in the desert, you can imagine that when they fired, if the shell came whistling past your Panzer tank, you would see that big puff of dust and smoke, and you would know exactly where the gun that had fired you was hiding. And you would then seek to fire as many rounds as you could back again to knock out the crew as quickly as possible. Now the 2 rounds. Cover your ears. Anti-tank gun detachments are always known for being fairly independent, but what they would have done, they would have pulled that gun through the hedge line over there, and so that only the barrel was sticking through, so that again it was camouflaged, and an attacking German tank or an approaching German tank, the first it would know about their presence would be that very large bang, and hopefully from the gun crew's point of view, a round hitting their tank. In this case, we've got a detachment of the Royal Navy who are going to be firing it for us. And the 2-pounder was a gun that was brought into production just before the Second World War, and for its day was a very advanced anti-tank gun. Now, we're lucky today because I've got an expert on the 2-pounder in the form of Keith Brigstock, who's here from the garrison, who own this gun and specialise in displaying it. I'll pass you to Keith.
Good morning. I see there's some very wise people at this end under the big tree in the shade. Round of applause to you guys, very sensible. You guys out in the sun, what can I tell you? Lots of sun cream, I hope. So what we're watching now is a Bedford MW 1500 weight truck, which was the main towing vehicle used for the 2-pounder anti-tank gun. And it was exceedingly good for taking out Panzer IIs and armoured cars and half-tracks. But what they hadn't realised was the Germans had Panzer IIIs, and of course it wasn't so good at Panzer IIIs. But it was very fast, and later on in the desert, when they ported it and put them on the back of different vehicles, Morrises in particular, and in fact the portee vehicle that tows a 17-pounder started life as a 2-pounder portee and was converted to tow the 17-pounder when the 2-pounder went out of action. Now, unlike the 17-pounder, the 2-pounder doesn't fire on its wheels. It comes off its wheels and sits on a tri-legged platform. And watching what they're doing now, unhooking the gun, preparing it for lifting. So the handspike now comes out, and what they do is they push the handspike into the front leg that you can now see pointing forward of the gun. They'll now lift it up, and they'll remove this wheel and lower it down onto that leg. There's a quick release on the wheel to make it quick and easy to get off. Of course, the last thing you want near your gun is your towing vehicle, so they would have moved the towing vehicle away just slightly enough to be able to make it easier to hide. Of course, the truck is a bigger vehicle, so it's harder to hide. So it's now on its platform. Now once it's on that tri-platform, it would be able to turn 360 degrees. Now what you're looking at is two extreme ends of technology. The gun you can see on the right, the 2-pounder, was our first British-made, purpose-built anti-tank gun. On the left, the 17-pounder was the last made, purpose-built British anti-tank gun. And there was only 4 years between them. So you can see how quickly technology moved, and what we would have in between would be the 6-pounder if we had one here. The Royal Artillery, in all its history, was only ever had 3 homemade, home-built anti-tank guns, and they were the 2-pounder, the 6-pounder, and the 17-pounder. And the 17-pounder in the 1950s was soon replaced with missile systems. The infantry, however, kept an anti-tank gun for some time, and they went on to a thing called the BAT, which stands for Battalion Anti-Tank, and it was a recoilless anti-tank gun, and they had the Wombat, the Mombat, the Mobat, all different variants. Okay, so what we're going to do now is fire the first round. So under the number 1 round. Load! Right, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to try and demonstrate to you now the speed of the gun and the fact that the gun has a working recoil system. So we're going to try and fire 2 rounds very quickly, with the first round automatically ejecting the used cart. Okay, under the number 1. Stand by. Did you see the barrel move back? I didn't hear that, ladies and gentlemen. Did you see the barrel move back?
No.
Hey! Right, ladies and gentlemen, every war film you watch and every gun that ever fires should recoil, whether it was a cannon or whether it's a modern anti-tank gun or modern field piece. Of course, they don't fire real rounds, so you never see them recoiling. What you've just seen is quite a rare thing, to actually see the recoil of a gun firing without a projectile coming out the other end and doing untold damage to whatever town is that way. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got 1 more round left. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2-pounder anti-tank gun, it might be small, it might be minute, but it does pack a punch. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed, Keith. That's most impressive. Really cracking little gun there. So the next gun that we're going to show you is another very rare piece. It's believed that there are only 3 of these vehicles that are in running condition in the world. And as far as I'm aware, they've never been seen towing an 18-pounder field gun, which is a combination that went out to France with the British Expeditionary Force in 1939. To be fair, most of them were left behind when we bailed out of Dunkirk, but it's a different combination altogether here, because what you've got is a field artillery tractor, which is the vehicle at the front. You've then got a limber, which is carrying the ammunition for the gun, and the gun at the back. And with the 18-pounder, the limber has also been dismounted. Now, the 18-pounder field gun first came into action with the British Army in 1904. So it was right at the beginning of breech-loading fast field gun technology, and in fact it was a complete breakthrough at that point, because it could fire quickly, accurately, and it was also very mobile, albeit in those days being towed by a team of 6 horses. The gun fought right the way through the First World War, was very, very successful, and normally is firing its 18-pound shell out to a maximum range of about 6,500 yards. But these fought on all of the battlefields, particularly in France and Flanders, and you might not recognise them completely, only because those very early marks had the recoil mechanism, or the recoil reduction mechanism, if you like, above the barrel rather than below the barrel, which we've got in this case. Now, I think we want to fire 1 round, please, now, so you'll hear the gun fire. Fire when you're ready. So you can see there that the gun's fired. No recoil on this one, unfortunately, and we're also firing from a fairly high elevation. So if that had been firing a live round, that would have been going somewhere off 6,000 yards in that direction. But what happened with this gun, the First World War ended, and the army cast around to make improvements to the gun, and they ran through various marks, ending up with this one, which is the Mark V. And what had happened by now was that they'd, as I mentioned earlier, put the recoil underneath the gun, and very similar to the later 25-pounder, and they were also experimenting with different kind of trails. So some still had a pole trail, which was the single rod coming out of the back, which was really something that was to do with being towed by teams of horses. And this last mark, where they put a split trail on. And so essentially the crew who are serving the gun can get right up to the breech. The other big advance that was made with this gun was going over to pneumatic tyres, and it seems like a simple thing to us perhaps today, but you've got to remember that these guns were designed to be towed by horses, and consequently they didn't have any suspension systems, they went slowly, and they had cartwheels. So they took a lot of knocking about. The British Army at that stage was seriously thinking about, and in fact getting, mechanised. And so many of the Royal Artillery horse teams were going and were being replaced by field artillery tractors, and a lot of experimentation was going on as well with vehicles that could tow field guns. This is another of the reasons why the Guy is so unusual, because you'll notice from its very, very short wheelbase, and in between those 2 wheels in the chassis is a massive winch, and that was used for recovering the gun, either when it slipped into a position that it shouldn't have done off a road or something like that, but also if it had been firing a lot of rounds and had sunk into the wet earth, then the tractor could winch the gun out and hitch it up and move it on. So because they needed to move over to pneumatic tyres, they cast around and they went for a thing called a Martin Parry conversion, which was made by an American firm, and essentially it bolted onto the old wheel spindle, and it was complete with a set of proper brakes, road-going brakes, and full suspension. And it also had those disc wheels you can see there, and the pneumatic tyres. And that meant that suddenly you could pull this gun at 35, 40 miles an hour along the road, and it was massively more mobile. The same thing applies with the limber, and so the whole combination suddenly was fit, or the army felt it was fit, to go to the Second World War. So what happened was there was a lot of experimentation. These combinations went out with the British Army and the British Expeditionary Force to France in 1939, and in May 1940, when the Blitzkrieg started, most of them ended up being lost and left behind in France, along with most of the rest of the British equipment from the British Army. But it should also be remembered that this gun fought in a lot of other places with a lot of other armies, including the Finnish army in Russia in 1919 with British forces, and also with the Irish army in their War of Independence. This gun will have missed that, it's a little bit too late, and not a lot of history on this gun is known, but it's likely that it went to the Irish much later, just before the Second World War, and was purchased, I think, about 18 months ago from a collector in the south of England by a very good friend of mine. So the gun, one of the things with this gun was that it could fire very quickly, so much so that in the First World War the commanders were told that they shouldn't use the gun any more than they absolutely had to. The barrels will last around between 12 and 15,000 rounds before they're worn out, but it is very easy to fire that many rounds with the gun. It's quick to load, quick to fire, and causes good damage downrange. It also, being a field artillery gun, it also has a wide range of ammunition, very often using high explosive, shrapnel, and in the First World War, gas. So you could write a message to your mates, put it into the round, and then fire it downrange to them to a safe point where they could walk over, pick up the shell, open it up and read the message. Seems a slightly antisocial way of sending someone a text, but hey. So we'll see the gun fire again now, and if you like to put 2 rounds through, fire when ready.
It's a gun, you know it's going to make a bang in it.
Thank you very much indeed. This is a slightly slower operation because it wasn't normally as important for an 18-pounder crew to move, because they weren't fighting tanks at potentially short ranges. Again, they're closing up the trail legs, and they're going to hitch the gun onto the limber. And at this point you realise where soldiers earn their money. Apart from being shot at, it's also pushing big lumps of metal around in the heat. I would offer to help, but I don't want to. So there we've got the gun mounted onto the limber. The quad is driving back. And at the moment all of this combination is unrestored, but it will in the next couple of years be restored for a planned visit to Dunkirk. So they've loaded that up now. And now you're going to see the 17-pounder. So again, much the same, you get the heavy member of the crew who goes on the end of the barrel. The legs are closed up, hopefully without catching the veteran who's between the legs there. Nothing I can say about that. But they push the trails together. The driver's jumped onto the portee. Resetting the barrel at a position so it can be towed. So the crew now getting back onto the towing vehicle, the portee. And are going to move off the field in front of you so that you can see them and take photographs. I'm not quite sure who's going first.
Let alone hot on the ground, it'd be even hotter up there, so... And a wing waggle, ladies and gentlemen.
The Mark 9 Spitfire, we offer two-seater flights in these, around the world and Dover.
To Britain and America. So this is sort of reenacting a possible scenario because the British soldiers never actually engaged with Russian soldiers in real life. But this sort of thing might have happened. So the vehicle going around is a 432, which is an armoured personnel carrier, more commonly known as a battle bus or an armoured taxi. Now this would carry a section of 8 troops with the driver and commander making 10, with the possibility to squeeze 12 people in. So they've just had information that the enemy has been spotted in the area and they've been tasked to go out and patrol. So this would have been quite common during the Cold War, for real. They would get sort of spook information that would send out a section of men just to investigate what somebody might have said to them. So this is exactly what they would have done. Now the weapons that they had at that sort of era, you see on the top of the 432s, the GPMG, the General Purpose Machine Gun, which is a belt-fed 7.62 machine gun that is very, very effective. And then when Iraq and Afghanistan started kicking off, they brought the Jeep back because they found it had a lot better stopping power than enemy did. I.e. that if you concentrate your fire enough, you would be going through brick walls. Imagine yourself sitting in the back of that where it's going over lumps and bumps. You can't see it coming, it's almost pitch black. And all they have inside is a little red light, just so you can see the person sitting opposite it. Right, so still patrolling around, almost reaching their target location. And then let's see what they're doing. So they've reached their the coordinates that they've been given. So the troops are going to deploy now. Oh, hello, the enemy have been found. So they're going to throw smoke, which didn't go off. The troops will deploy out the back of the 432. So you see the guy holding the door, he would have been known as the doorman, because when that door swings round, it's very heavy and it hurts. So he has shut the door, and you notice that they will always deploy to each side of the back of the vehicle. Because once they have been deployed, the vehicle will actually retreat, I should say, move backwards, just to get out of the way. So if there is any anti-tank weapons there, the infantry will deal with that first before they start sending in. Wow, that's close. Right, so these guys are now going to start working in a section. They've got the called section attack or advance to contact. So one half of the group will stay and lay covering fire while the other half move forward, and vice versa. They call it pepper potting. Right, so they're going to be they're moving left now. So they'll always peel off behind. It's a section weapon, the GPMG is going to move forward, and the other half of the section are going to lay down covering fire. Then they will stop, find themselves a vantage point, and then the other half of the section should move forward. Looks like they've got some mortars inbound. So the mortar's getting very close. Right, looks like they're not retreating, but withdrawing to a safe distance. Well, at this point, somebody will be on the radio to the 432 commander, hopefully calling in for extraction. Right, there we go. So withdrawing behind the 432. There we go. So one section should be laying fire down as they move back, peel off to the left, not drop his kit all over the floor. That would have been a beer fine. Right, so they've regrouped now. Let's see what they're going to do. Right, doors open, so they're going to reload and get out of the village. There we go. So him shouting last man. So everybody inside knows that there's nobody left outside. There we go. So they're going to beat a retreat, so to speak. They're going to be reporting back to their commanders about where the enemy was spotted, where they got engaged by the enemy, and then they'll decide whether to send more troops forward, more kit and equipment to deal with that task. There we go. I opened the back door of the 432 earlier to have a chat with them, and it was like a sauna. It was very comfortable. But there we go. I'm not sure if that's it. Is it all over? think it is.
Looks like they've been hit, ladies and gentlemen. We've walked straight through a VC main force camp. Odd rounds of sniper fire from the VC. Coming in from the other base. Oh, looks like the M113's loaded up with their light armoured. Hopefully they'll bring the 50s to bear. Oh, that's a 50 calibre opening up now. Infantry is deployed from the carriers. A little bit of imagination there, please. just check in to see if there's any VC up there. No sign of anything. No bad guys to show for it. And one wounded lurk. Most of the conflict in Vietnam happened at about 20 to 30 metres. Quite often you never even saw the opposing forces. And the VC were very good, and the North Vietnamese on removing their casualties from the battlefield to give no indication that they'd suffered the damage they'd suffered. Guys in the arena, can you hear me? They're just making their weapons safe. Blank firing weapons, but the only difference is they have no heads on the end of the bullets. They can still hurt them and anybody else that's daft enough to be in the way. Guys, can you hear me in the arena? Can you turn and face the crowd? At least give them a wave. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. While they just tidy up and police up their weapons, they'll do a bit of a short lap round because they just love driving around in these boxes. Feel free to pop over and see us a bit later. We'll be over on the right hand side by the Huey helicopter. Come and ask any questions or just buy us a beer. We're easy. We've been Rolling Thunder. Thank you very much for your time.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sean. Massive round of applause for Sean as well, the commentator for the Rolling Thunder group. Right then, ladies and gentlemen, so don't go anywhere. We're going to kick out the Americans from the arena. So there's some quite nice bits of kit out there. So don't go anywhere. We're going to see how much dust we can fill the arena with. So we take it from there. Right, bear with us. Right, they're just going to fire off the last remaining 50 cal rounds. So just to let you know, and then we'll clear the arena and get the heavy boys in.
I laughed a couple of one dad had taken the film with his kids for to Tesco's to do some shopping.